Does China keep opening its doors or closing them? What does the resolution adopted at the third plenum of the 20th CPC Central Committee say about it? I talked to Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And a US business delegation visited China right after the same meeting. I had an opportunity to sit down with Roberta Lipson, founder and vice chair of United Family Healthcare, a member of that delegation. Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. China is definitely opening, but the United States is closing its doors. World-renowned scholar Jeffrey Sachs told me recently. Like many experts who care about China's economic development, he has paid close attention to the third plenum of the 20th CPC Central Committee, and holistic is the exact word he has used to describe the resolution adopted by the meeting, as he praises China for adopting a systematic approach to high-quality development. But as some international analysts seem to insinuate that China is turning its back on reform and opening up, what does Professor Sachs has to say? Plus, what underpins China's goal of building a high-standard socialist market economy? I sat down with Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and President of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Here's our conversation. Professor Sachs, welcome to The Point. So the third plenum, on the lips of everybody, the third plenum of the 20th CPC Central Committee has just concluded with the adoption of a resolution on further deepening reform comprehensively to advance Chinese modernization. And this very lengthy document, I trust you have read it. What impressed you most about the resolution?
I think this is a very realistic approach and a very holistic approach. It's realistic in that it faces the real challenges that China and all the world now confront. The ecological crisis, the rapid technological change, the global environment, which is extremely complicated geopolitically and economically. It's holistic in the sense that there is the focus not only on the economy, but on social inclusion, on the environmental aspects, on governance aspects, on geopolitical aspects. So I very much applaud this systematic approach and this comprehensive, holistic approach.
The resolution says about reform and opening up that opening up is a defining feature of Chinese modernization, and we must remain committed to the basic state policy of opening up to the outside world and continue to promote reform through opening up. But some international media outlets have cast doubts on whether China is opening up further or closing its doors. What's your take?
Well, China's definitely opening, but the United States is closing its doors. The U.S. has put on tariffs and quotas and regulatory and tax disincentives to engagement with China. And we see the essential flattening, even decline of China's exports to the U.S. market. In short, the U.S. has turned protectionist. The U.S. is encouraging Europe to turn protectionist as well. This is sad, and I hope Europe doesn't follow suit. But what this does mean is that China's opening to the world, which was based to a significant extent on a rising trend of exports to the United States, needs to find other ways of engagement in the world other than the U.S. market, because with the U.S. more protectionist, with growth through exports to the U.S. essentially foreclosed, China needs to engage much more with the rest of the world, essentially the developing economies. That's where the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives come in. I'm quite confident that China will do this. So I don't know if any international commentators are saying China's closing. It's certainly not true. But what is true is that the older Western countries are becoming more protectionist.
There have also been doubts about the direction of China's development, where it is going. Some pundits are asserting that China's socialist market economy is not conducive to private or foreign businesses. Do you agree?
Not at all. What we have is the US complaining that China has overcapacity. It's a kind of ridiculous idea, but what it really signifies is that China has become the most efficient, low-cost producer of what the world really needs. That is zero carbon energy sources like solar modules or wind turbines or fourth generation nuclear. It means battery supply chains. It means electric vehicles of all kinds, automobiles, fast rail, new kinds of ocean shipping. It means advances in digital technologies, in long distance power transmission, in 5.5G and onward. I'm very impressed and very gratified that China is making a very broad advance across a range of key technologies for the 21st century for a green and digital world economy. That's success. That means that China will be exporting these technologies to the rest of the world. This is not a faltering of the economy. It's a demonstration that China has a model that is really innovative and enormously competitive inside China. Think of the hundreds of electric vehicle manufacturers and very low cost from the point of view of global competitiveness.
So basically, what they are saying is that, look, the private sector or the foreign businesses are not benefiting as much from the kind of new growth that you just outlined, which China has been emphasizing for the past few years. The document has definitely highlighted the importance once again of state-owned sector and the private sector. It says that China will see that the market plays the decisive role, in resource allocation, and that the government better fulfills its role. How do you see the opportunities for private sector, private companies, and foreign enterprises in China's development going forward?
First, I think what's notable is that we are in a knowledge-based and innovation-based economy for the world leaders. That includes China, the United States, the EU, and so forth. What the third plenum said very clearly is that science, technology, and education are absolutely fundamental, and this is true. China is turning out hundreds of thousands of scientists and technologists, engineers, and so forth for this new innovation-based economy. Second, an innovation-based economy is a mix inherently of government stimulus for science and funding of science, together with the private sector saying, okay, we're going to make money out of these new technologies, such as the highly competitive electric vehicle market in China. So it's a mix of public and private, state enterprise and private enterprise, market finance and public finance. This is a good model because we're dealing with a complex public-private kind of transformation in all of our economies right now. And I think China has a very good mix of that. Now, what it means for foreign companies is that China is a highly competitive domestic market. These are not the old days where the Western companies were bringing the technology and China is catching up. The Chinese companies are very dynamic, thank you. They're very much on the cutting edge. So to be competitive in the China market, the foreign companies need to bring a lot. They need to work very hard. They need to run very fast. There aren't easy pickings for them. But this doesn't mean that the market's closed. It just means that it's highly competitive.
When China talks about a high standard socialist market economy, how do you understand it? Is it that the government is going to play a more important role, or that the market is going to play a decisive role, but the government has to do a better job regulating it, making sure that the wealth gap, for instance, is not growing too big, that the market is not bringing the kind of negative consequences that a pure capitalist economy experiences regularly?
The idea that an economy could run just on markets is an idea from 18th century Britain. It was tried in the 19th century of Britain, and it has fans in the United States until today who are called libertarians. But it's a very naive idea. If you try to run a society only on the basis of markets, you get huge inequalities, you get environmental destruction, you get social exclusion, you get instability, and you don't get the kind of innovative society that comes from the combination of state participation and leadership in basic science and in promoting new technologies combined with the competitive private economy. So sophisticated economists around the world have known for a long time that the 18th century market-only approach is extremely naive. Maybe it's taught the first day of an economics class in the US, but it should never be taught past the first day. The second day should be you need a mix of institutions, public and private, civil society and others that come together and create this kind of knowledge-based, innovation-based, fair, inclusive society. I think this is what China is aiming for, because this is what's meant by a high-quality economy. If you look up the background to that, it says that it's an economy that pays attention not only to the GDP, but to the social inclusion, to the environmental sustainability, to the quality of education and innovation. And this is the tribute of a holistic approach, which is what we need for the 21st century. I sometimes give this the title of sustainable development, because that's a concept widely used at the United Nations that says focus not just on the economy, but on economy, on society, on environment, on peaceful cooperation.
The resolution actually says, prints very clearly, that China will ensure that economic entities under all forms of ownership have equal access to factors of production in accordance with the law, compete in the market on an equal footing, and are protected by the law as equals, thus enabling them to complement each other and develop side by side. For the critics who are saying China is pedaling backwards in terms of letting the market play a decisive role, do you think they even read the resolution?
Well, you're putting your finger on an important point, which is that there's a lot of deliberate propaganda and bad-mouthing of China right now. But understand what it is. There's kind of a neurotic fear of China in the United States. What happened is very straightforward. China became rich, powerful, large in an absolute sense when measured at international prices, about 25 to 30% larger than the US economy. This shocked the American policymakers. That's where the ideas of things like overcapacity came forward. But the main point is that it leads to a lot of superficial analysis. There's a hope in the West, actually, among some of these people, that China will have a crisis, that the debt crisis, the banking crisis, the local government crisis will stop China, or that something else will go wrong. I find all of that a terrible approach. China's economic growth and well-being has been good for the whole world, including the United States, and of course good for China. Economics is not a zero-sum game where China's gain is America's loss. It's a positive sum or win-win proposition. And if there were better understanding of that basic fact, we would have less rhetoric and less propaganda in the Western media.
Well, others would say These are big announcements, commitments, but they are just empty promises if they're not translated into actual policies and implemented effectively. Your take?
This is true, and nothing about this agenda of an innovation economy or about decarbonizing China's vast economy by 2060. I hope it's actually by 2050, by the way, that this is easy, or that it's easy for China in the face of U.S. protectionism to build export markets in the emerging and developing countries. This is not simple. And the United States policy is not goodwill to China, and it's not likely to be even whatever the outcome in the U.S. November elections, because the anti-China sentiment is real. It's very unfortunate. It's very much misguided, but it's not about to go away quickly. So China needs to devise strategies on, for example, one of my favorite programs is the Belt and Road Initiative, because that engages Chinese technology in building and modernizing the rest of the world. And I think that's truly a win-win proposition. But it requires a big design, careful design of financing and strategies, cooperation with neighboring countries. The energy transformation, which is now underway in China, requires major investments in the years ahead, and not only within China's energy system, but interconnecting China with the ASEAN countries, with Mongolia, with the rest of Northeast Asia. That's a lot of diplomacy as well as a lot of investment. So this is not a simple time. I think the document says that many times, by the way, that these are challenging times. But I find China's approach more systematic and thoughtful than just about any other place in the world. In the US, we don't have this kind of comprehensive idea or holistic approach right now. It's very scattershot, very much, of course, arguments across political parties, but not very strategic. So I think what China is trying to do is strategic in the right kind of way, but it's not simple.